An Appeal to My Muslim Brothers and Sisters by Mario V. Melendez, January 13, 2015. This is Part 2. In the Middle Ages, the Jews were at their most prolific in philosophy, science, mathematics, astronomy, literature, and the arts that it's recognized as Judaism's own golden age. And lest the world forgets, that occurred within Islam's own golden age and under. The protection of the legendary Muslim Caliphate in Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, widely acknowledged as the medieval world's centre for culture and learning, with its pioneering universities and libraries older than any in the Christian world. The Christian minority flourished as well in this caliphate-sponsored sanctuary from Muslim illiberality until the usual intolerance crept in and poisoned the well again, which begs the question why these three religions, all supposedly even more mature, now by 1,000 years, can't live side by side in peace as they once did. Indeed, why can't these great religions coexist once again and bring to the table the fruits of their individual labour for the common benefit of all humanity? I submit that coexistence is possible, but not without religious reformation. Christianity has done its part, and so has Judaism. Now it's Islam's turn. If only Islam did its own reformation of sorts early on, the beheadings and other outrages by ISIL and the aforementioned terrorist attacks wouldn't have happened, at least not in the name of Allah, which is why I urge Muslims not to wait 1.5 millennium like Christians did, and to do something in their own personal capacity now. No need for big moments a la Martin Luther, who famously nailed his defiance on a Catholic church's door in 1517, or a la Emperor Hirohito in 1946. On their own, and right this moment, individual Muslims could quietly take a long, hard, critical look at the excesses of Islam. For starters, they could look at hardened orthodoxies born of supposedly divine revelations that segregate people between believers and infidels, assign less value to the latter, and justify their discrimination by the former. Universal unanimity in matters of religion is an impossibility. That's just not how human beings are wired, so forget about it. So how about if we simply embrace each other as all children of God and of equal value to Him regardless? And no religion, confident of its own strength, should be jealous of another religion. Monopoly in anything is never a good thing, as it leads to complacency, stagnation, and lethargy, whereas competition brings out the best in each other. Besides, what makes us sure God prefers monotony over variety? Would you prefer Beethoven's symphonies with just the brass section playing, instead of the full panoply of various orchestral instruments? And would you rather Van Gogh painted in monochrome instead of his usual plethora of vibrant colours, each one in shade darker and lighter? I didn't think so. Why diversity would be so taboo in any religion, given that God designed a universe overflowing with it, is beyond me. Which brings me to yet another analogy in nature. Biology teaches us that diversity is in fact the key to the very survival of the species, including us Homo sapiens. So what could be so bad about it? If He preferred uniformity, He would have gone there. But again, in His infinite wisdom, He chose not to, so why should we? Or do we know better than God? Talk about human arrogance. To all fundamentalists and literalists of all religions, think about that. Speaking of which, God gifted us with critical thinking and the freedom to exercise it. Later, I shall touch on a proud but abandoned intellectual tradition during Islam's golden age that exercised it freely, proudly and rigorously. Science and philosophy, and their benefits to humanity, came from that gift. Surely, God wants us to keep putting it to good use. One's beliefs should conform to reality, not the other way around. Works for me, but apparently not for those who insist they speak for God. Ask Galileo and Darwin. In varying degrees, all religions characterize God as jealous, irrational, demanding, intolerant, petty, vengeful, fearsome, bloodthirsty, etc. The list goes on and on. Hindus are notorious at practicing agonizing self-torture to please the divine. How do you like it if you're reputed to take pleasure from human suffering? Germans call it Schadenfreude, and it's a malicious, shameful vice. Worse, Christian and Islamic dogmas on eternal hell necessarily presuppose God as a torturer of the cruelest kind. Looks like man has made a complete inventory of his worst traits and attributed them all to God, who is also supposed to be in constant need of praises because he has an insecure ego too, apparently. The creator of the universe, so stupefying, stupendous and splendiferous. I used up all my superlatives and still come up short. Has an insecure ego. Go figure. God is probably itching to come down from on high and sue everyone for defamation. Speaking of bad traits, given his penchant for hate, narrow-mindedness, and destruction, man is probably God's biggest disappointment ever. Hopefully the likes of Beethoven, Einstein, Newton, Da Vinci, Shakespeare, Gandhi, Galileo, Mozart and Darwin are enough to redeem all 7 billion of us in his eyes. But on the debit side is man's insatiable appetite for mayhem. Leave it to him to find, or create from nothing, a rationale for it, and he will. Somehow he always manages to find it when he needs it most, from one reliable source. That is religion. Interestingly, that's the common rationale for both Pearl Harbor and the attack on September 11th, both of which dragged America into wars. One religion is Shintoism, the other is Islam, both of the extremely radical variety. Radical Shintoism, also known as political Shintoism, deluded an entire nation into believing they're the divine. Race mandated by the living God, Emperor Hirohito himself, to subjugate supposedly inferior races in the Pacific. But first, his imperial army had to neutralize the only military power that could stand up to it. Hence the preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor, which in turn ignited World War II in Southeast Asia. The rest is a history of man's unbelievable capacity for cruelty to his fellow man when driven, insane by religion, not unlike the outrages being committed today by ISIL in Iraq and Syria, but by Hirohito's pivotal act of renouncing his divinity in an unprecedented address to his subjects. In 1946, Shintoism had its own sweeping reformation in one fell swoop. That, coupled with General MacArthur's insistence on the separation of shrine and state, surgically excised Shintoism of a malignancy within it before it metastasizes to the rest of the body politic again. Consequently, Japan stopped waging wars against its neighbors and in just 23 years flourished into the world's second largest economy and a force for good, analogous to the Enlightenment and the full flowering of the Renaissance following the Reformation. When passenger airplanes are hijacked and turned into weapons of death and destruction under the banner of any given religion, that religion is in a very serious crisis and should have been dealt with immediately by its followers. And when 13 years later, marauding savages descend on innocent civilians to decapitate them and brag about it to the world under the same banner, reform is too late. But better late than never. I see cause for hope. But first, let me come clean with my own Catholic faith. There are aspects of it I'm very ashamed of, and I'll be brutally frank. Out of the many, let me just mention what I consider to be the most egregious: the Inquisition, slavery, colonialism, and the Holocaust. To punish and deter heresy, The Catholic Church directly presided over the ruthless torture of hundreds of thousands in a 6th century reign of terror called the Inquisition, starting in the Middle Ages. Other Christian denominations were not to be outdone and did their own dreaded witch hunts and burnings at the stake, from Europe to the New World in the Americas. With respect to slavery, America's long history of it proves that its solid Christian foundation couldn't deter such an inhumane institution from flourishing. In fact, such foundation only served to somehow justify it, necessitating a great civil war to finally abolish it, albeit it took another century in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to effectively abolish slavery's vestiges in the form of institutional racism. And with respect to colonialism, the Christian cross was used consistently as a cynical weapon far more effective than the sword in subjugating whole indigenous peoples and robbing them of their riches and their dignity, along with their right to self-determination. Also, all of Christendom, particularly the Catholic Church, committed monumental moral failures in the lead-up to and during the Holocaust, the most unconscionable crime against humanity ever committed. It is by no means the actor that directly committed it. That ignominy belongs to the Nazis alone, but by its unremitting anti-Semitism, it contributed to the hostile environment that culminated in the near extinction of an entire people and their religion. It's true that there were a few brave Christian souls who spoke out at the time, but that was the exception rather than the rule. So, before Christianity goes all sanctimonious and holier-than-thou on another religion, perhaps it should first go look in the mirror. Its moral failures only go to show that despite a religion's highest aspirations for the divine, it's really just of man, hence all too vulnerable to human error and frailty. And that goes for all religions. That's the end of Part 2. Please click on the link on screen to Part 3.